Hello, welcome to Shad Life. Today I am going to answer the questions people sent in this Q&A video. I appreciate everybody that sent me questions. That was super cool. So we'll go ahead and get to it. I'll continue doing more of these and try to avoid repeat questions unless there's something else I can add in there. But yeah. Let's go ahead and just jump right in and get to the first question. All right, so I decided to pull this into the Q&A. Ed was actually asking a question about the REI co-op bike I did a review on. So we'll skip that. I appreciate your take on geometry. I'm curious as to what's driving the slack enduro downhill trend, as it seems XC is closer to what most people actually ride. Maybe I'm wrong, and it seems that if you want more suspension travel, along with it comes slacker, longer geometry. Maybe I want a bit more cushion and plushness for the XC trails I ride, but not slacker geometry. Trends are interesting. And then I told him that I was going to add this to the Q&A thing, and he responded, and he said, back in the day, it seemed like cross-country racing really drove the trends and technological advances. Then, as downhill became more specialized, that definitely drove the trends. Maybe I'm wrong and just way out of touch, but it seems that neither disciplines are as popular as they once were. I don't know about that. Well, we'll talk about that in a second. If that's indeed the case, I'm curious as to what's driving the trends, customers or marketing, and I'll definitely talk about that. Yes, very valid question. So let's first talk a little bit about the geometry and the XC situation you were talking about. So if we go back when you were talking about when XC drove most of the trends, that really was what mountain biking was. I used to call it road biking on dirt, believe it or not. Always joked about it because bikes had long stems, you were way over the front wheel. It was basically the concept of what a road bike is, but with frames made for wider wheels or tires and so on and so forth. Over the time, the geometry evolved, and it evolved because people were doing more technical things. People were riding skinnies. Just a lot of this like North Shore style riding started coming out in the 2000s and things like that. So the geometries of bikes started to evolve. Full suspension was evolving. All that stuff was happening, and it just was just progress. So you are correct that XC actually doesn't drive the trend anymore. It hasn't for a very long time. What has happened though since then is if you look at to go shopping for a mountain bike today, you have so many options. You can buy an XC bike. You can buy what do they call them? A down country, which is basically a little bit more aggressive XC bike. A trail bike, an enduro bike, a free ride bike or a park bike or whatever you want to call it, and downhill bike, right? Like there's so many different categories now. And so the biggest kind of trend right now in mountain biking, I think more recently, the enduro explosion happened. So basically what an enduro bike is longer travel, downhill capable bike, not with as much travel as a downhill bike, but quite a bit more travel than bikes have had for a long time. And enduro racing became a thing. And the reason why enduro racing became popular is you don't really need lift access and big mountains and long massive runs to do enduro, because enduro is a bunch of staged events, much more like rally car racing, right? Like you basically do your run and it can be as long and as short as it needs to be. Then you have a certain amount of time. It's not timed, you just have a certain amount of time to ride back up the hill, which is usually pretty generous. And that part of your run isn't timed, and then you do another run, and usually you have 4 or 5, maybe 6 stages. So enduro, the reason why the bikes have become popular is because they're climbing capable to get you to do fun downhill runs. um, but that kind of riding is not the majority of riding most people are doing on mountain bikes. So the trail bike category is probably the more legitimately ideal category. Those bikes have gotten quite a bit more aggressive, and the Salsa Rustler I ride is actually a trail bike. It's kind of a little bit more aggressive of a trail bike. It's got a 150 fork, but 130 rear travel. But I love it on pretty much all the trails here in Minnesota, and we don't have big, massive downhill runs. So, yes, the trends are definitely going to that kind of long, low slack direction. But I think it's gone too far, and I think there's some companies that are realizing, hey, we need to maintain this category of less super slack downhill purpose bikes. And so keeping the head angle in that 66, 67 degree range, somewhere like that, is kind of becoming that stable norm range. So with these different types of bikes, if you're on XC bikes, you're not going to really get more travel. Well, that makes sense because you're not riding on as rugged of terrain. And if you are riding on more rugged terrain, you should bump up to a trail bike, a downcountry or trail bike, and get a little bit more suspension and then have a little bit more aggressive geometry. So I feel like bikes are pretty good at matching their purpose. So if you're looking for an XC bike with, say, 140 millimeters or 150 millimeters of suspension travel, that's kind of undoing the purpose of an XC bike. An XC bike is designed to be really efficient, light, fast, a good climber. And when you start adding more suspension, the bike bobs more, and it's much harder to make the drivetrain and the power transfer more efficient, and so on and so forth. So you're unlikely going to ever see an XC bike come with a lot more suspension. 100 to 120 is a really good ideal amount. How you can smooth out your ride is by setting up your suspension for how you want to ride. You can definitely do a lot of tweaks and adjustments to your suspension to give you that smooth ride, hopefully without compromising your ability to climb, and so on and so forth. So I hope that answers that question. Let's go to the second part of your question. I know this is getting kind of long. So if we look at XC and downhill, yeah, neither one of those are the popular thing driving the trend. It's that middle area I talked about. That would be kind of trail enduro kind of category, and so on and so forth. There's a huge movement of hardtails coming back in to play, and I think that's important because there's a lot of parts of the country and a lot of mountain biking where you do not need full suspension. I've said that for a long time. Full suspension is not always necessary, so you can save a lot of money by going to a hardtail. So what is driving the trends? Is it the customer or the marketing? Well, what really drives the trends, and it's kind of unfortunate, is the customer should be driving the trends. I think this is the same in the auto industry and a lot of industries. I feel like the marketing and the want to make money drives the trend, because they control what gets made. They do a lot of things based on pro athletes and what the pro athletes want, which I find kind of interesting because pro athletes aren't necessarily, as much as we want to say they are, the best know-it-all of how a bike should be, especially for everybody else who's not a pro athlete. Pro athletes, a lot of those people have really good extreme talent that the rest of us don't have. And so to make all the bikes for their abilities doesn't make sense to me. But then there's the marketing side or the cost saving side. Like right now, there's this big trend to make all bikes 29ers. right? That seems to be the move that everybody's going. Suspension companies are making only 29 specific suspension forks and things. And I don't think that's what the customers want. I love 27.5 wheels and I don't want them to go away. But it's a cost saving thing for them because having two different wheel sizes means they have to make different jigs and models and things like that and so on and so forth. So I don't know. I do think that kind of the more marketing or industry decisions drive things more than the customer drives things, because I talk to an awful lot of people out there that are like, why can't I get this anymore? Why isn't it there? Why isn't it right? And it's kind of a bummer. Big one of that, I know this is getting long, but top mount shifters, back when the little thumb trigger shifters went away, before that they used to have index top mount shifters. By far my most favorite shifter. You could just rip through your gears and index them and all that stuff, and they have just completely gone away. You just do not have a choice of having a top mount indexed shifter. Now there's a few companies making friction ones, but then you still gotta like move it and make sure it's in gear. I really wish that would come back. I would absolutely love just the lever, just rip through the gears how I want them to be. But now we're going into electronic shifting, so that may never become a thing. Anyway, let's move on to the next question. That was a really good question. Quite a few different things in there, but yeah. Appreciate you hanging in there with me. Let's get to the next question. All right, let's move on to the next question. Here we go. Buffman Sam, my question is, what is a good amount of suspension travel for most Minnesota riding? Oh, I kind of touched on that. What travels should you be looking for when buying a bike from Minnesota? All right, let's answer this question. Well, I don't know if you'll like this answer, but my answer for Minnesota riding is the best suspension is a hardtail with front suspension. That is, for most of the trails in Minnesota, all you need, and you can save a lot of money by going that route. You can have a pretty high-end bike if you stick with a hardtail with upgraded components and everything for, shoot, $2,000 or less, right? Once you go to full suspension, you're looking at quite a bit more money. If you want to know what a full suspension bike would be, stick with like a trail bike. I mean, even a down country bike. I don't like cross country bikes because they're too low in the front end for me, and they're designed for a lot of extreme climbing. There isn't a lot of extreme climbing in Minnesota, so either down country, or if you do a little bit of jumping or like riding flow trails or something, get a trail bike. 130, 140 millimeters of suspension travel, somewhere in there. My Salsa Rustler is a trail bike, 150 up front, 130 in the rear. Hopefully that answers your question. But honestly, I'd stick with a hardtail. All right, the next one here, Neil Art. How much time do you put into off-season training on the stationary bike? Really good question. Let's talk about that. I'll start off by saying not as much as I would want to, or as much as I plan to do it, right? Ideally, I want to ride on my Zwift setup. If you've been following my channel, that's my state all-road currently, is hooked up to my Wahoo trainer, which adds resistance automatically and everything. It's a direct drive system. It's super sweet. And then I just added a big widescreen TV, so I'm more immersed in Zwift and so on and so forth. So that's my indoor training setup. I also go fat biking, so I kind of mix and match the two. If I go fat biking, I consider that a ride, my training, and if I'm on Zwift, I consider that a ride, right? So I try to make sure I get a ride in at least every other day. That is my goal over the winter time. So, and during times when fat biking conditions aren't all that great, which has been the last month or so because it's been too warm, and then when it does get cold, it's all icy and the trails just kind of suck. I don't like riding in those conditions, so I've been doing a lot more Zwift. Do I actually adhere to every other day? No, I wish I did, but life happens, and sometimes I go 3 or 4 days before I ride Zwift or do my training. But I try to do it every other day and try to stick with it. And I'll do try to do kind of a mixed bag of rides, but I'll at least do an hour. If I do less than an hour, I'm not really that satisfied. So I want to do an hour to 90 minutes, somewhere in there is generally what I try to do. And I try to work pretty hard, make sure I work up a really good sweat and stuff like that. Sweet. Good question. All right, next question, Joe LePlay. Is that how you say that? How does MTB being more slack versus upright, more geometry questions, say like a 2012 XC bike affects steering? Which is better for XC style riding? All right, yeah, good question. Well, XC bikes are purpose built for XC riding. They have evolved since 2012 though. So 2012, you're going to find shorter reach, shorter top tube, and that's the number from, if you go vertical from the bottom bracket, measure from there to the center of the top of your head tube, not the stem, not the handlebars, the head tube of the frame. That's your reach. On older bikes, that reach was much shorter, and then you'd compensate it for a longer stem. Now the reach has been getting longer and the stems have been getting shorter. So modern XC bikes, they're not as extreme as, say, a trail or enduro bike where you're running like 35 millimeter stems or 40 millimeter stems. They're running like usually 60 or 70 millimeter. I think I see a lot of 70 millimeter, but that's down from like the old school 100 to 120 millimeter stems. So I would say is, how does it affect steering? Well, XC bikes are a lot more twitchy. They have steeper head angles, and they're much if you're going higher speeds, they're less stable. But they're not designed to be doing downhill. They're designed to be doing more technical, tighter trails, and that quicker steering is really advantageous when you're having to pedal. And your speeds when you're pedaling and propelling yourself are going to be between 8 and 12 miles per hour. And if you're climbing, you'll be down to like 4 or 5 miles per hour sometimes. And maybe you're doing a tight switchback on a climb or technical things on a climb. That quicker steering does help. Older XC bikes, maybe a little too quick, but modern XC bikes, anything like 67, 68 degree head angle is going to be pretty good for XC style riding. So, but just remember that when you get to the downhill and the steeper, faster stuff, you want to shift your weight further back than you would on like a trail or enduro bike to compensate for that longer stem and kind of lower front end and things like that. So just keep in mind, like, what kind of riding are you actually doing? If you are doing a lot of like more steeper sections of trail, even with your XC, trail bikes are actually pretty good. They're pretty capable. They're light and things like that. So you might want to look into one of those instead of an XC bike. If you're racing, you definitely want to stick with an XC bike to be on that competitive edge. But a modern XC bikes, I feel like the geometry is a lot better than older XC bikes. So there you have it. All right, next question, Pat. Oh, I know Pat. Will you have any more jump sessions with your MTB Hopper ramps? I liked the session I went to last year and would love a refresher. Yeah. I absolutely plan to have more sessions with my MTB Hopper. So, yep, I actually I have a website called shadholland.com. I struggle to always keep it as up to date as I'd like to, but I have a calendar section in there that I do want to start putting, planned skills sessions or events that I plan to be at. So look for that. And you're pretty much in touch with me in other areas like Facebook and so on and so forth. So yeah, I definitely plan to have more. Would be cool to do it at the park again. and keep it here in Minneapolis, but I probably will do a couple up in Cuyuna also. Cool. Good question. I'm Chad Deegan, another person I know, local here. Are you willing to set up, share your hopper ramp and airbag at a local trail skills park for a ride day event? This kind of piggybacks onto the question Pat asked, so let's talk about it. This one's a little trickier. I know you show up and ride the airbag that Dustin has for Ride Minnesota brand, or Ride brand, I guess is the name of his company now. But that is, he has a much better setup for it. He's got a trailer, he's got a vehicle that tows it well, all that stuff, right? My setup isn't quite that extensive. There's another piece of that too, and I don't know, I'm assuming Dustin has insurance and stuff like that. The airbag and the MTB Hopper ramp are much bigger, and I know you, Deegan, that you have the skill. I know you can jump that kind of stuff. I'm not concerned about you, but I am concerned about riders that don't have the skill. So I personally would rather kind of target more entry-level riders and smaller, safer ramps for doing these kinds of things. That being said, I have thought about the idea of partnering with Dustin, and we could have 2 airbag setups out there and so on and so forth. Mine being a little bit smaller than his, because even though our airbags are about the same size, he props his up another 1.5 feet or so, and he's got a bigger launch, a 6.5 foot launch versus my 4.75 foot high launch. So yeah, it could be maybe that in between size. So who knows? We'll see. I'll talk to Dustin, but I have no guarantees on that. It's not really in my plans to do that, but since you brought it up, maybe it's a good idea to see. Probably keeping it here in the cities somewhere when he does some of these events at parks and things like that. Okay, Stuart asks, how do you overcome the aches and pains of getting older, or do you just ride it out, so to speak? Come on, Stuart. Am I getting old? Man. That's a really good question. There's a lot to this. I want to keep this relatively short, so I'll try to just touch on the bases. A lot of it has to do with my diet. What I put into my body really matters. And a lot of people don't think about that a lot. I see a lot of people, they eat fast food, they drink Mountain Dew or Red Bulls. They don't treat their bodies very good when they talk about what they put into their body. On top of that, some of you might know this, but I'm sober. I've been sober for over 6 years now, from alcohol and anything else. I don't do any other substances. That is also really important. I don't tell people that you shouldn't drink, but I feel like a lot of people drink too much, and that does affect your health. Like, if you're like a daily drinker, you got to drink after every ride, or you go out and party hard, things like that. That's not good for your body. I'm not judging people or telling people what to do, but if you're into your health, you really have to pay attention to what you're putting into your body. And alcohol is not very good for your body, especially in higher quantities or like on a regular basis. More and more studies are coming out about that. So that's the putting what you put into your body side of things. Now the other side is, and I did a video recently of some of the exercises I do to kind of keep my core strong and stuff. I'm actually realizing even more as I get older. I've gone to an orthopedic place called TRIA to have my back looked at because I've had some back pains and things like that. Healthcare, maintenance, things like that. Especially as you get older, you need to keep your core strong, keep your muscles strong, and believe it or not, keep your weight maintained. I mean, you're probably never going to be some ripped 6-pack ab kind of dude when you get to be my age, but the more weight you put on, the more your bones and stuff has to deal with, especially when riding and going over bumps and jumping and things like that. any added weight you have is like putting on, if you're 20 pounds overweight, which is kind of where I'm at, 15 to 20 pounds, that's like having a 20-pound backpack on when I'm landing off of jumps and stuff, right? So you got to think about all that stuff. So I try to maintain my weight. I eat healthier, and I make sure I work my core and do core exercises. And I'm going to actually have to start doing more of that now. Hopefully I get a good plan with the orthopedic place, going to physical therapy, things like that. That's a big part of it. I want to keep riding for as long as I can, and that longevity, especially, I'm 55. As I get older, really important that I stay motivated and keep doing that work, because if I don't, I'm going to decline much quicker and not be able to do the things I love doing. So it's that simple. Good question. Rob, looking at dirt jump frames, some are one size fits all. However, some are offered in a regular and a long. If your height matches regular, but your normal trail bike's reach is still short of the long, how do you decide on size? What characteristics would each have? Okay, good question. Let's get into that. So first of all, you made a comparison between a trail bike. I'm assuming you mean your main mountain bike. I don't know if you mean a trail category mountain bike, but your main mountain bike versus your DJ bike. Well, the first thing you want to do is, they're both very different. Don't compare the two. Mountain bikes are designed for you to be in a comfortable while in a seated position, and when you get away from XC bikes, they're designed for you to be in a good centered position while standing, also in riding technical stuff. So, more modern mountain bikes anyway. So that's a different kind of riding that you're going to be doing on, say, a regular mountain bike than you will be doing on a DJ bike. A DJ bike, you should always be standing. I think of a DJ bike like I think of a BMX bike. Your seat is slammed. Your intention on that bike isn't to be seated and pedaling around and riding things. You might sit and pedal for a brief moment or whatever to ride to wherever you're going to get to, whatever. But the bike isn't designed as a seated riding bike, and neither is a BMX bike. So I kind of put the DJ bikes more into how you would size up a BMX bike. So, and I do follow kind of manufacturers' recommendations when it comes to DJ bikes. So if they say, because they're all different, one company's long might be different than a different company's long, one company's short might be different, whatever, right? So whatever size they recommend, I'd kind of stick with that. How they'll ride differently is, if you get a bike that's a little too long for you, then it's harder to keep the front wheel up, and you'll tend to be front end heavy. And for jumping, you don't want to nosedive and be too far forward. So shorter, if you're ever like close to between sizes, I always go shorter on a DJ bike and stuff. I actually do that on mountain bikes, but that's really different on how you ride it. I do a lot of jumping and technical riding on my mountain bike, so I always go smaller if I'm more between sizes, which I usually am right on that cusp at 5'7". A lot of times I'm will creep into the medium category, but I always go with small. I tried a medium once. I didn't really like it. I didn't feel like I had the control over the bike I wanted. Stick with the one that fits based on what they say, and you'll be happy with that. The DJ bikes tend to have a higher rise handlebar. You want that also. Anything that helps you get the front end up, because if you're going off jumps, you want to be able to pop. If you're bunny hopping, you want to be able to pop. Things like that. So, yeah, they ride differently. So I would stick with the regular if that's what they say fits you. Okay, Jay Sviknik. I think that's how you'd say that. It's probably not even close. What do you do for a living? You have an impressive collection of stuff. Gotta pay for it somehow. Smiley face. That is a big question. And some people might know what I do for a living because I have talked about it in the past, but it's been a while. So let's talk about that one because I'm sure a lot of people wonder. So I definitely do not make a living off of YouTube. I mean, what do I have right now? Somewhere around 2,200 subscribers, something like that. That is not even close to enough to make a living off of. I think to make a living off of YouTube, you got to be probably 50K or more, and that would be a slim living, if even. It would be a okay income. 100K, but I mean, I think YouTubers, they find other avenues too. They do Patreon, they do things like that. That really isn't my intention, by the way. I don't, if it happens, awesome. But I don't really. My reason for doing this is because I have a passion for bikes, and I love sharing the information I have because I've been riding a long time. I started riding and racing BMX in 1980. I rode bikes before that. I didn't really, it wasn't BMX, but I did BMX like things. um, and I've been riding straight through ever since, got into mountain biking, things like that. So I have a strong passion. I have a lot of knowledge and experience from just the many years I've been at this. I've worked in the bike industry a couple different times, one running a bicycle shop called Twin City BMX. Worked for Quality Bicycle Products also for about 4 or 5 years. So, yep, lots of industry experience also. So, what do I do for a living? Well, actually, when I worked for Quality Bicycle Products, I did what I do today. I'm actually a software engineer. So I got into writing software right after the Twin City BMX closed down. The owners decided to close it down. That was 99. And I got into software engineering. How that happened is I started building websites for the bike shop and a few friends of mine, and I really liked doing it. And my education, I went to school for computer technology in the late 80s. And it was only fitting that I get into doing software, and I love it. I still love it to this day. And just over the years, it's progressed. And if you know anything about software engineering, we make pretty decent money. I mean, it's a very highly demand skill. A skill that's in high demand. That's what I tried to say. And we get paid pretty well. But that isn't the only reason why, because I know people that make as much money as I do, and they don't have the free flow income that I have. So I'm single. I don't have kids. I don't have a family. Things like that. So that gives me a lot more extra disposable income than say somebody that has a family with kids and things like that, because kids are expensive. So I would say that's probably more of the reason why I can afford what I afford in buying bike parts. Plus, that's my priority. Like, I spend a lot more money on bike parts. I don't spend much money on other things. I did talk about being sober. I don't go out to clubs. I don't spend money. I know people that spend, literally, they go out for a night on the town and they spend well over $100 going out and buying drinks and things like that. I don't do that either. So I have a lot of disposable income, mostly for that reason, on top of the fact that I make pretty good money being a software engineer. But yes, and my passion is bikes. I love it. It's a little ridiculous sometimes with how many bikes I have and how much stuff I have, but I do it partly because I have this YouTube channel and I enjoy doing the YouTube channel. And so I buy things that I probably wouldn't normally buy. Like, if I didn't have the YouTube channel, I wouldn't do a lot of the things I do. I mostly do them because of my channel. So it's kind of interesting when I think about it that way. So I probably spend more money buying things and having, like, think of this mullet build that I'm doing. I've spent a lot of money on it, and I'm doing it, for my own curiosity about doing a 29er front wheel with a 27.5 rear, and how I like it and so on and so forth. But I probably wouldn't really spend the money and do that if it wasn't for this YouTube channel. I also do it because I want to go experiment and do videos about it and inform everybody out there in YouTube land. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. I enjoy doing it, but definitely not something I make a ton of money off of. Cool. Well, that wraps up this video. Now you know what I do for a living and how I afford doing this and so on and so forth. Cool. I really do appreciate your support for my channel. To help support it, hitting the subscribe button helps me out. It just keeps me motivated, knowing more and more people want to watch my content. Liking a video, I'm a little more particular about that. Don't just like a video to like it. Like it if you like it. That helps me understand what kinds of things do more people like versus what they don't like, and then I see analytics and things like that. But subscribing helps put my videos in your feed, and you'll see my videos when they come up more often, so on and so forth. Awesome. This was a lot of fun. Hopefully I will do another one of these sometime soon. Peace.